Hey guys, today's story is about a bunch of warforged that try to cheese every game mechanic possible. So this story is not about a specific incident, but more of a months-long game that serves as the most annoying and bothersome game that I have ever run. In retrospect, I realize that much of it is actually very funny and inventive, but at the time, it was a monstrous pain to deal with. To this day, this game stands as the most egregious personal example I have of being run roughshod by my players. This was close to 10 years ago and was done with Pathfinder, like most of my worst stories. I received an adventure module as a birthday gift, Whispers of the Vampire's Blade, technically a 3.5 module, but easily shifted over to Pathfinder, but also set in Eberron, a setting I knew nothing about and had no interest in. I'm informed that my group, who is my brother, his hetero life mate, and the one I like, all want me to run it, and a continuing game in the Eberron setting. Already this is kind of a I hate it situation, but I wasn't running anything else at the time, so I familiarized myself with the setting as best as I could and memorized the module. The module calls for a party at level 4, so that's what I tell them to make, and this is where the nightmare begins. They all want to play Warforged. For those of you who only know 5th edition, Warforged used to be way more powerful, especially in the hands of a cunning player. They don't need to rest. Ever. They're immune to poison, sleep effects, paralysis, disease, nausea, fatigue, exhaustion, effects that cause sickened condition, and energy drain. They don't need to breathe, eat, sleep, and they never get tired. In fact, they can repair themselves using one of several craft skills, and one warforged can repair another if they want. Also, every one of them rolls a wizard, the most easily munchkin class in the whole game. When assigning stats, there was no attempt at making anything not min-maxed to the 9s. I don't think their total strength was above 25, and only one of them had charisma in the double digits. That one served as the de facto face of the party, and in social interactions, the other two would literally stand behind him and to the side and whisper things to him like some sort of weird robot Sith. There was no hesitation on abusing the rules. From session 1, they are sharing spellbooks to get a broader selection of magic and using the fact that they need no rest to crank out magic items, as each of them had taken item creation feats. In Pathfinder, creating items is a skill check at the end. If it fails, then the item is ruined and your investment is lost. So you can only feasibly make things if their DC is at or below your value when you take 10. Taking 10 is a rule that allows you to count your skill check as rolling at a 10, providing the situation is low pressure. They abuse the assistance rules to get their take 10 values a bit higher, letting them make magic items more powerful than they can actually make, and much faster too. Normally a craftsman can only do 8 hours of work in a day, but since they don't get tired, they literally work 24 hours a day, making the thing 3 times as fast. On top of that, there is a drawback you can apply to magic items when making them, so that they have limitations of function, like only functions at night, or may only be used by women. That significantly reduces the DC to make it. The limitation they chose is only functions when used by a warforged, reducing the DC and allowing them to craft much more powerful gear for themselves. They opened up with these shenanigans, so from session 0 I knew that this was going to be a frustrating time. I included all of that just to give you an idea of what I was dealing with running this game for these maniacs. I don't remember everything they got up to, but here are some highlights in roughly chronological order. The module that they asked me to run, they abandoned it from the outset. It involved them hunting a vampire on essentially a flying cruise ship, but instead they found the vampire, cast summon monster to cover him in squids, set the ship on fire, and featherfalled off the deck when it started to crash. They then rooted around in the wreckage for valuables and went away to another city. Nothing involving that module was engaged with ever again. They met a friendly NPC in a dungeon who used firearms. After fighting alongside her for a little while, one of them realized how valuable firearms were, and the fact that this NPC had a personality and an adventure hook attached, and waited for her to enter a room with a heavily reinforced door. They then closed the door, locked it, barricaded it, and simply stood there for a few weeks for her to starve to death. They then opened it up, took her stuff, and threw her body in a fire. They further abused their magic item creation cheese to make insane amounts of money. They gathered all their funds and components and started making huge amounts of cheap magic weapons and then sold them for a significantly lower price on the open market, not giving a crap about the reduced margins because they made bank flooding the market with +1 longswords and chain shirts. A bunch of arms-dealing merchants had their trade seasons ruined because a trio of libertarian robots dabbed away with all their profits. Whenever their crimes and general tomfoolery was catching up to them, they would simply run somewhere else. Literally, they would run. They ignored fatigue, never needed to rest, and had little to no roots put down anywhere. So they would just outpace literally anything that might chase them. As long as they had a good head start, they could outrun any land-based pursuit. Once, when they were being pursued very doggedly, they engaged what they called the Mole Protocol and used a setting-specific spell to burrow into the ground. While there, they just waited a few months, sitting in relative stillness while the heat died down before emerging and continuing with their business. They encountered a monster called a Nethalgu, a giant spider crustacean that eats brains. Because they were warforged, they didn't have brains to begin with, so the creature was not that interested in them. They eventually managed to forge a deal to sell the creature brains, so they started an organ harvesting operation by victimizing the poor underclass of Sharn by turning invisible and using the suggestion spell to draw people into a room and get them exceedingly drunk, smother them, and then surgically remove their brains to sell to the Nethalgu for 100 gold a pop. When the heat for their illicit brain harvesting operation became too much, they leaked the location of the monster they were working for, betrayed it, and then claimed the money that had been put up for its demise. None of this was planned, by the way. One of them just made a good arcana check when fighting it, realized what it was, and came up with the plan on the spot. They discovered bear traps in the equipment guide and immediately set to making their own and using them to defeat every meaningful challenge they came across. The dang things do 2d6 plus 3 damage and reduce the speed of anything they hit, letting them kite dang near anything and kill it with spells. They are also ridiculously hard to remove. They would cover literally every square of a map with these, cast invisibility on several of them, and then levitate or fly over the trapped floor. When damage reduction started making them less useful, they started enchanting them. Once, they used animate object on one and attached it to a wall, making the D&D equivalent of a chain chomp. They started supplying weapons to a rebel/bandit faction, selling them weapons and armor at cost in exchange for plunder from their various terrorist actions. Yes, they armed terrorists for fun and profit. It's also worth mentioning that the entire game they were insisting they were not evil. They were also big fans of alchemist fire and would regularly craft gallons of the stuff and keep them in airtight sealed drums that they would throw with the telekinesis spell. It turns out, dousing your foes in fantasy napalm is a good way to deal with most problems. They were immune to most of their own pyromaniacal tendencies because they crafted items that gave them resistance 20 to fire, allowing them to casually walk around rooms filled with screaming, ablaze enemies. Multiple times they stated that their intended plans were at the end of a session, only to abandon them at the beginning of the next, solely to screw with me and ruin any plans I made. This isn't conjecture, minding. They actually confirmed this for me years later when they were talking about this game. Their justification was that they felt doing things I wasn't prepared for made it harder for me to tailor challenges for them. If you'll notice, that's not a justification. It's just being a jerk. There's more to it, but these are some of the more worthwhile mentions. It is worth mentioning that every session had a good 2 hours of them sitting around and figuring out how to munchkin out magic items and feat combinations. It was as if that was part of the game to them. In the end, the thing that killed it was scheduling. The one I like got moved to second shift, and he was never able to schedule to play, and I jumped at the chance to end it. I am alone in hating this game, though. They still regularly talk about how much fun the whole thing was, and wish they could do it again. Well, guys, first and foremost, I think the biggest issue here is the fact that the DM allowed pretty much any of this. There's a lot of things that they did that should not have been possible from the get-go, or have been allowed. Such as him allowing them to craft for a full 24 hours a day. By default ruling in Pathfinder, you can only craft 8 hours a day. And generally speaking, when it comes down to crafting items to sell for money, they really have to try to min-max it to make even a small margin of profit. And generally speaking, even if they do have the ability to turn a profit on making an item, if they sell multiple at the same time, the chances are that as a DM you should probably reduce the amount of money that they are getting for it, or some such thing. You're flooding the market, therefore the worth of it would be significantly reduced, meaning that they would not be able to turn a profit on it for much longer. But in any case, it is rather amusing reading a bunch of this. I did actually have a good chuckle at quite a few things that he said happened. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the DM and say that he was just inexperienced at this point in time, so he's probably learned from his mistakes by now. But in any case, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. And if you have a story that you'd like me to narrate, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.